Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this edition of the Opposing Sideline. I'm here with Trey from the Dog House podcast. How are you doing today, Trey?
Doing well. Appreciate you having me on, Daniel, for the world's largest cocktail party, Georgia versus Florida, Florida versus Georgia. So always a big time matchup. Pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you for having me. For those that don't know, one of my first ever collabs with another podcast was Trey having me on his podcast last year. So definitely check him out. We'll talk about more about that at the end. But with that said, very happy to have you on. What we typically do here is I'm going to ask you what the strengths and weaknesses of this team are, and then also get your prediction as well as here's how the Bulldogs could win. Here's how the Gators could win. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, for a lot of Gators, I can't talk for them, but many times this year we've either had conflicting game times. Like I believe last game we were playing Kentucky as you were playing Texas, so I didn't get to see too much of that. Clemson game, I only got to see the first half because I headed up to the Florida Miami game, so I haven't gotten to see a lot of Georgia this year. What can you tell me the strengths of this Bulldog team are?
Well, from those two games, those are actually two games that Georgia looked pretty good in, because to me this has been the most recent inconsistent Georgia team. They'll look great for one half, like they were down 28-0, and Alabama just looked like some NFL team, and then Georgia rallies in the second half. So I'd say the positive for them, because they're not a complete team and still hasn't played a complete game, but if they can somehow, on the positive, put a complete game with Carson Beck and he can't turn the ball over and gets 2-3 touchdowns, 300 yards, get the run game going, and if that defense shows up as they did against Clemson and Texas, then, this could be a hell on wheels team. That's a but. But I would say the most positive, what they're great at, is resilience. They can get punched in the mouth. They've been tested. Went on the road against then was a scrappy Kentucky team. I know they've kind of fallen off, but that was had to kind of pull it out at the end. 13-12 win. Went on the road and against a hostile environment, and I believe got the best punch at the time from Alabama and hung around and lost a heartbreaker. And then going on the road again against Texas, everybody was counting them out. Kirby used them as a positive against them and beat, looks like a good Texas team, 30-15, held them to 38 total yards in the first half. They benched Quinn Ewers, which I was shocked, put Arch Manning in. So I'd say grit, resilience. Carson Beck has not been the quarterback as advertised. They have him at earlier in the year as top quarterback off the board in the draft. I never really saw that. I was telling everybody pump the brakes on that. Looking at him this year, 15 touchdowns, 8 picks, pretty good passing yards. Running game has struggled. We're in the 90s, I believe. Defense finally looked pretty good against Texas. So if that can continue, we're getting some guys back. Tate Ratledge, probably our best lineman's coming off the tightrope surgery. If he can kind of come in. Also might get some guys back on defense. Malachi Williams is looking healthier. He had 2 sacks against Texas. Also, Jalen Walker was hell on wheels, defensive player of the week. 3 sacks in the first half, 8 total sacks, fumble recovery. So we're getting those guys back. We just got to find some guys on our go-to guy. We don't have that alpha receiver. We got basically a committee. Got Dominic Lovett's looking okay. Aaron Smith looks good at times. He also has the drops. Also, they had 7-8 drops in the last game. That's something else. So all in all, I'm going to say resilience and grit of the team, but not a consistent team, but the potential's there, if I answer your question.
Okay, and I know you talked about some weaknesses, like Beck has been, inconsistent, I guess is the best way to put your description, and the run game at times has not really been there. But what would maybe some defensive weaknesses be for the Bulldogs?
Yeah, I'd definitely say it's supposed to be a positive, but secondary got really I hate to say it looks like cottage cheese, Swiss holes in them against Mississippi. They were throwing over them, giving up 300-something yards to a true freshman. Didn't look good at all. giving up 31 points, but then rallied and was really aggressive against Texas. So I'm sure Kirby used that as motivation. So I'd say the secondary, to answer your question, did look better recently. Also, the D-line being banged up. They've been ran on. I think Georgia's top 40 in the rush defense, I believe, which is not like Kirby's teams of the past, but look better against Texas. Kind of question how good is Texas, because they rolled around and got pretty much pushed to the brink against Vanderbilt, even though Vanderbilt is a much improved team in the past. So there's that. And still haven't put a complete game yet. So I guess another positive is I would put we are good on special teams. I know that's like always underrated and looked at, but got a great kicker. Our Peyton Woodred has only missed one kick or two kicks in the last year, or 2 years. So that's always a great thing. So I'd say that. But defensive line and the secondary, I think, have been some of the weaknesses.
And I'll be honest, for a lot of the fans listening, they're probably happy to hear that a little bit. Of course, for those that want to hear this side of the conversation, I did appear on Trey's Doghouse podcast. He'll have that out talking about the Gators. And one thing we talked about was DJ Lagway and how he brings a different dynamic to this offense. So I'm sure a lot of listeners here that have seen that are happy to hear that maybe that D-line may not, hopefully won't bring as much pressure, or that the secondary not being the strength they're supposed to be, like you said, may give us a little bit of a puncher's chance there.
Right.
So, mark the wrong spot for something. That's all right. They know that when I'm marking times, sometimes I do funny things, and then they later on try and click through, and then they're like, that's not what you said it was. Anyways, and yes, that will be in that. I don't mind having the train of thought commentary, but anyways, world's largest outdoor cocktail party, rivalry game. Sometimes weird things happen in this game. Of course, 2007, UF's rolling pretty good. Tim Tebow on his way to a Heisman. All of a sudden, Georgia storms the field, gets that 15-yard penalty, and in a way that changes the game. Georgia goes on to pull the upset. Mm-hmm. And 2014, 10 years ago now,
yep.
Florida's got true freshman Treon Harris making a start against the Bulldogs, only throws 6 passes the whole game.
That's right.
Very good defense, somehow gives up 300 yards on the ground in a game that's just crazy. So in a game where sometimes crazy things happen, not guaranteeing that they will this year, what would you say the Georgia Bulldogs win this game if?
Definitely a wacky series. I mean, going back to what you said, Steve Spurrier years, him winning 9 out of 10. Georgia fans remember that. I believe you mentioned on our podcast, Urban Meyer was, did you say 5? 5-1?
Yeah.
So Kirby Smart is 6-2, won 6 out of 7. So I believe it depends on vice versa who says that. I think Georgia's up 56-44-2, 55-44-2. So to win this game, always go back to this. Got to win the rushing battle. Also got to win the turnover margin. I think if those win, usually statistically, if you look at that 9 out of 10, Carson Beck plays well. And we keep the penalties down. Don't want to go ahead and blame the refs because that was controversial, but a lot of bad calls in that Texas game. The whole reversing of it, even though as a Georgia fan, I agreed with. That's right. I agree with it. That was not pass interference. So they got the call right, but you can't switch the call like that. That's never been done. That's a whole long story. Also, another one is it's going to hurt. We got starting in the secondary out. Dan Jackson's out with targeting. He'll be back in the second half. Also, Jonel Aguero. If that was targeting, not targeting, to my opinion, I agree it was one targeting, so one guy should be out, maybe Dan Jackson. So that's another thing to look at. Georgia is deep in the secondary. So go back to answer your question, win the rushing battle and win the turnover margin, and Georgia should be in good shape.
Okay. Now, we're going to look at the reverse, because you know this Georgia team better than I do. Of course, as fans of our team, we always look at, okay, here's what we need to do to win. But it's hard for us to say, okay, here's what the other team needs to do to win, because we don't know the other team. However, knowing your team as well as you do, based on what you know of your team, what do you think the Gators have to do to win?
I'm going to say first with DJ Lagway, who's aggressive and likes to take shots downfield. Our secondary has been vulnerable this year. So if you guys can take a lot of shots downfield, get the running game going. What was the guy name? Was it Ba, who had 5 rushing touchdowns against Kentucky? If you get him going, turnover battle. Georgia has turned the ball over a lot with Carson Beck. I think 3 out of 4 games with multiple 2 or more picks. So if you got him having deer in the headlights the way he sometimes do, is turnover battle, win the rushing game, and if you take a lot of shots downfield, you guys will be in good shape. Also, if you can get some penalty flags, maybe PI, which Georgia's had some higher penalty games, just being undisciplined. So I would say that would be definitely a recipe for you guys to win in any of those. And if anything happens, you guys always hang around. So I think like we'll probably make a pick. Gators will hang around in this game.
Yeah. Before we do, I knew you had talked about the running game. I meant to go back to this, but of course, one of the storylines coming into this game is Trevor Etienne facing, the Gators after being here for 2 years. How has he been for the Bulldogs?
Yeah, I'd say, started off with everybody was a little negative on him because he did get the whole DUI, a little off the field distraction, sat. But he's slowly gotten better. 3 touchdowns and 87 yards. Georgia has been a pass first team, so that's another one. But he's slowly been kind of he can take a catch out of the backfield. But to me, he's had 82 carries, 42 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 of those in the Texas game. He's been, definitely the number one back, but I will say maybe not as advertised. I was hoping he would be. He could still do his maybe 1,000-yard rusher. I made that bold prediction he would get over 1,000 yards. So maybe quite hasn't been that way because Georgia has been pass heavy. It might have been because of Mike Bobo making the calls. So I would say hopefully see a lot more down the stretch. But I am glad that we did get him. Of course, he has added value. But that's my thoughts on it. I hope to see him do more, and I'm hoping for a big game against his former team because I'm sure there'll be some motivation there.
Definitely, and there's motivation on this defense to stop the guy who switched sides, as I'm sure there will be with a few guys we have that, or at least one guy who went to Florida State as well, as far as transferring to rivals. And I'm sure for that 1,000-yard prediction, maybe you weren't planning on him missing the first game at the time, and then suddenly 1 game off, and that can be a big impact. But if you make the playoffs, extra chances, right?
That's right.
But with that said, go ahead and tell us where we can find your work, Trey.
Yeah, really appreciate the plug there. Yeah, we're on YouTube at Doghouse Podcast. We have 520 subscribers and growing, so check us out there. Even I know I'm on the enemy Bulldog side, give us a shout there. And we're on Twitter as well at Doghouse Talk. Got over 700 followers. We're on Spotify as well and Instagram, which I've been doing more reels. Sorry, the Doghouse Podcast on Instagram. So check all those out. Really appreciate you having me on the show.
Oh, definitely. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate you having me on your show. Without that, I'm not sure if I'm a part of the College Huddle, which has paid dividends with lots of different teams being able to bring on. So thank you for that.
Yeah, really appreciate it, Danny.
All right. And everyone, thank you for checking out this episode of The Opposing Sideline, part of the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. And with that said, thank you for listening. And as always, go Gators.